June 23, 1944. The mid-Atlantic Ocean, approximately 870 nautical miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Commander Uno Kameo stood in the cramped control room of I-52, one of the largest cargo submarines ever built by the Imperial Japanese Navy. His mission was clear: deliver 2 tons of gold, 228 tons of raw materials including tin, tungsten and rubber, plus 14 technicians to German-occupied France. The submarine had traveled over 8,000 miles from Japan, navigating around the entire African continent to reach this rendezvous point. Through his periscope, Commander Kameo watched the German submarine U-530 slip away into the darkness. The meeting had gone perfectly. The Germans had transferred 2 radio operators and an advanced radar detector called Naxos, equipment desperately needed by Japanese forces. Everything seemed under control. Within 3 hours, Commander Kameo and his entire crew of 94 men would be dead, victims of a technology they didn't even know existed. This isn't just the story of one submarine's final moments. This is the story of how American innovation transformed undersea warfare forever, turning the vast ocean into an acoustic surveillance grid where nothing could hide. The technology that killed I-52 that night would revolutionize naval combat and send shockwaves through the entire Japanese submarine force. Let me take you back to understand what made I-52 so special, and why its loss represented far more than just one sunken vessel. I-52 belonged to the Type C-3 cargo submarine class, vessels specifically designed for long-range supply missions, as shown in declassified U.S. naval intelligence documents from June 1945. These submarines were engineering marvels. I-52 measured 356 feet in length, displaced 2,564 tons on the surface, and could dive to depths of 295 feet. To put that in perspective, that's about as long as a Fletcher-class destroyer. The submarine could travel an astounding 21,000 nautical miles without refueling, essentially capable of circling half the globe, but impressive specifications meant nothing without reaching the destination. By mid-1944, the journey from Japan to Europe had become a death sentence. Of the 4 Japanese submarines dispatched to Europe as blockade runners, only one would complete the round trip safely. 2 were sunk on the return voyage. I-52 never made it to Europe at all. The mission itself reveals just how desperate both Axis powers had become. Germany needed raw materials: tungsten for armor-piercing ammunition, rubber for vehicles and aircraft, tin for various industrial applications. Japan needed advanced military technology, radar systems, jet engine designs, high-altitude aircraft improvements, anything that might help defend against the devastating B-29 bomber raids. As discussed in declassified August 1945 Military Intelligence Division documents titled German Technical Aid to Japan, these submarine exchanges represented the lifeline keeping both nations' war economies functioning. Here's where the story gets interesting. What Commander Kameo didn't know, what the German submarine commanders didn't know, was that the Allies were reading their mail. Ultra, the code-breaking operation that changed the war. American and British cryptographers had cracked both German Enigma codes and Japanese naval ciphers. When German Naval Command transmitted the rendezvous coordinates to U-530, Allied intelligence intercepted and decrypted the message within hours. When Japanese Naval Command acknowledged the meeting time, Allied commanders knew exactly where I-52 would surface, and exactly when. The USS Bogue, a small escort carrier, was immediately dispatched to intercept. These escort carriers, sometimes called baby flat-tops, were converted merchant vessels carrying about 24 aircraft. The Bogue's air group consisted of 12 Wildcat fighters and 12 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. But it wasn't the aircraft themselves that made the difference. It was what they carried. Let's talk about the technology that was about to change everything. American TBF Avengers, operating in anti-submarine roles in 1944, carried 3 revolutionary systems. First, ASB series radar that could detect surfaced submarines at ranges up to 15 miles in good conditions. Second, Mark 54 depth bombs containing 250 pounds of explosives, fused to detonate at 25-foot depths. Third, and most importantly, sonobuoys. Sonobuoys were deceptively simple devices developed by the British in 1944 under the code name High, then rapidly improved and mass-produced by American industry. Picture a small cylinder about 2 feet long, battery-powered, equipped with a hydrophone listening device and a radio transmitter. Drop it from an aircraft, and it would float on the ocean surface, its hydrophone dangling beneath the waves, listening. When the hydrophone detected sounds, submarine propellers, machinery noise, anything underwater, the sonobuoy would transmit those sounds via radio to the aircraft circling above. Think about what this meant. Before sonobuoys, when a submarine crash dived to escape an aircraft, it essentially became invisible. The aircraft could drop depth charges where the submarine submerged, but once the submarine started maneuvering underwater, the aircraft was blind. Sonobuoys changed that fundamental equation. Now the aircraft could hear the submarine moving, could track its course changes, could follow it through the darkness hundreds of feet below the surface. American forces also possessed one more deadly weapon, the Mark 24 mine, codenamed Fido. The name was deliberately misleading. It wasn't a mine at all. It was an acoustic homing torpedo, the world's first. Drop it near a submarine, and it would autonomously guide itself toward propeller sounds, following the target until impact. No aiming required, no calculations needed. Just drop it close enough, and the torpedo would do the hunting. Now, imagine you're Lieutenant Commander Jesse D. Taylor, piloting your TBF Avenger on the night of June 23, 1944. You're part of Composite Squadron VC-69, flying from the USS Bogue. Your mission, find and destroy I-52 before it reaches German-controlled waters. You know roughly where the rendezvous occurred because Ultra-Intelligence provided the coordinates. You've been searching for hours. At 11:40 p.m., your radar operator calls out a contact, 10 miles ahead, surface target. You reduce altitude, approaching cautiously. At 1 mile out, you open your bomb bay doors and drop 2 smoke lights and a purple sonobuoy, marking the position. At half a mile, you fire a Mark 6 parachute flare. The ocean explodes into brilliant light. There, illuminated like a stage actor under spotlights, sits I-52. The submarine is massive, far larger than the German U-boats you've hunted before. You can see crew members on the conning tower, scrambling as they realize they've been spotted. The submarine's diving alarm sounds across the water. You attack immediately, dropping 2 Mark 54 depth bombs. The bombs hit the water on the submarine's starboard side. I-52 is crash diving, taking the emergency profile that every submarine practices endlessly. The bombs detonate just as the submarine's hull passes through 25 feet. The explosions are close, very close, probably causing damage but not fatal. Here's where traditional anti-submarine warfare would end. The submarine has dived, vanishing into the Black Ocean. In 1942, you'd circle the area, maybe drop more depth charges based on guesswork, then return to the carrier, never knowing if you'd succeeded. But this is 1944, and you have sonobuoys. You turn hard right, executing a figure-8 pattern to bleed off airspeed. The Mark 24 acoustic torpedo needs to be released at specific speeds, around 120 miles per hour, or it won't arm properly. As you maneuver, you drop an orange sonobuoy near the submarine's submergence point. Your radio operator immediately picks up sounds transmitted from the floating device. Propeller noises. Clear, distinct, getting fainter as the submarine dives deeper. You make 2 more looping turns, positioning yourself. Then you drop the Mark 24 torpedo, releasing it at I-52's approximate location as the submarine travels south. To create a tracking grid, you drop 3 more sonobuoys, a blue buoy to the south, a red buoy to the north, a yellow buoy to the west. The purple and orange buoys are already in position. Now you have 5 hydrophones listening underwater, creating an acoustic surveillance net. Your radio operator cycles through the sonobuoy frequencies, monitoring each in turn. The sounds coming through your headset are clear enough to paint a picture of what's happening hundreds of feet below. Sonobuoy recordings from this attack still exist in the National Archives, preserved on wire spools labeled Gordon Wire No. 1 and Gordon Wire No. 2. What they captured that night was extraordinary. First, the steady thrumming of I-52's propellers as the submarine attempted evasive maneuvers. The sound is rhythmic, mechanical, unmistakable. Then, at 23:47, exactly as documented in Lieutenant Commander Taylor's tactical mission report, a massive explosion. The Mark 24 acoustic torpedo had locked onto I-52's propeller noise, followed it relentlessly through every turn, every depth change, and struck home. The sound of the explosion on the recordings is sharp and violent, but what comes after is what makes these recordings truly haunting. Listen to the silence for just a moment. Then, a new sound begins, rushing, roaring, like opening a valve under tremendous pressure. That's the sound of air escaping from I-52's hull, compressed air held at massive pressure to control buoyancy, now venting uncontrollably into the ocean as seawater floods the submarine's compartments. Then comes the crunching. Taylor's crew described it as like someone stepping on a tin can or breaking a pile of dried twigs. Those sounds are I-52's bulkheads collapsing under pressure. The submarine, designed to withstand depths up to 295 feet, was catastrophically damaged. As seawater flooded in, the weight became too much. The submarine was falling, sinking far beyond its crush depth, and the pressure hull was failing section by section. More explosive sounds followed, sluggish and percussive. Probably torpedo warheads or depth charges stored aboard the submarine detonating under pressure. Then, 2 final sharp sounds, possibly small explosions, as remaining equipment failed. Then silence. Complete silence on all 5 subbuoys. I-52 had sunk to the ocean floor, coming to rest at approximately 17,000 feet depth, nearly 3¼ miles down. Commander Uno Cameo, 94 crew members, 14 passengers and technicians, 2 German radio operators, all 111 souls aboard, gone. The next morning, aircraft from the USS Bogue returned to the attack site. They found oil slicks spreading across the ocean surface, covering several square miles, floating debris, rubber ingots, pieces of wood, fragments of clothing. The evidence was conclusive. I-52 was gone. But here's what makes this story so significant. It isn't just about one submarine, it's about what this represented. Think about I-52's mission. Germany desperately needed rubber. According to January 1944, German Naval Staff Operational Division War Diaries, Germany had only enough rubber stockpiles to last until November 1944. Blockade runners, both submarines and surface vessels, were supposed to bring additional supplies to extend those stockpiles until the end of 1944. The loss of I-52's cargo meant German vehicles, aircraft and industrial equipment would run short of critical materials months earlier than planned. Japan's loss was equally severe. The gold aboard I-52, valued at approximately $25 million in 1944 dollars, was payment for German technology. The technicians and engineers aboard were specialists being sent to learn about German jet engines, advanced radar systems and other equipment. Their deaths represented not just human tragedy, but lost knowledge, lost industrial expertise that Japan desperately needed. More broadly, I-52's sinking demonstrated that the Atlantic Ocean had become an American surveillance grid. No Axis submarine, no matter how large, no matter how well designed, could cross undetected. The combination of ultra-intelligence, long-range aircraft with radar, sonobuoys and acoustic torpedoes had created a multi-layered system that was virtually impossible to evade. The statistics tell the story. During World War II, 996 Axis submarines were sunk. Of those, 130 were Japanese. The loss rate for Japanese submarines exceeded 70%. Submarine service, initially considered prestigious and honorable among Japanese naval officers, became recognized as a death sentence. Of the 41 German U-boats sent to the Far East during the war, only 4 completed the round trip. The ocean, once the highway for Axis expansion, had become a killing ground where Allied technology reigned supreme. Let me put this in perspective. Between 1941 and 1945, American submarines sank 1,314 Japanese ships totaling 5.3 million tons, accounting for 56% of all Japanese merchant losses. Japanese submarines, despite their technical sophistication and impressive size, sank merely 184 Allied ships totaling about 1 million tons. The disparity wasn't just numerical. It represented a fundamental difference in how two nations approached undersea warfare, industrial production, and technological innovation. While Japan built the world's largest submarines capable of carrying aircraft and circumnavigating the globe, America built systems that could hear them coming from miles away. While Japanese engineers created magnificent vessels, American factories produced sonobuoys, FM sonar, acoustic torpedoes and radar systems faster than Japan could conceptualize countermeasures. Here's a question worth considering. Commander Kameo was an experienced officer, his crew was well trained, and his submarine was one of the most advanced in the Japanese Navy, yet they never had a chance. Was this battle lost before it began? Could courage and skill ever overcome such technological disparity? Think about it. The technology that sank I-52 became standard equipment throughout the Allied anti-submarine forces. By late 1944 and into 1945, every American anti-submarine aircraft carried sonobuoys. Every hunter-killer group centered around escort carriers used coordinated tactics combining radar, sonobuoys, and acoustic torpedoes. The Japanese submarine force, operating with 1942-era technology against 1944-era American systems, was systematically eliminated. Japanese submarine commanders began reporting strange experiences throughout 1944 and early 1945. Depth charges would fall in precise patterns despite submarines being hundreds of feet deep. Torpedoes would follow evasive maneuvers, as if guided by invisible hands. They were being hunted by technologies their own navy hadn't deployed, couldn't counter, and barely understood. The psychological impact was devastating. Lieutenant Commander Nukio Nambu, who commanded I-401, one of Japan's giant submarine aircraft carriers, later told American interrogators, after his surrender in August 1945, that he understood Japan had lost the war not from any battle, but from overhearing American radio traffic during a patrol. The casual efficiency, the abundance of resources mentioned in routine communications, the sheer volume of coordinated operations across thousands of miles of ocean, all pointed to capabilities Japan simply couldn't match. In June 1945, 9 American submarines equipped with FM sonar penetrated the Sea of Japan through heavily mined straits that Japanese planners had considered impregnable. The Sea of Japan was supposed to be Japan's safe haven, protected by 4 lines of underwater mines in Tsushima Strait. FM sonar, developed specifically to detect underwater obstacles, allowed these submarines to map entire minefield patterns and navigate through barriers Japanese engineers thought would stop any underwater approach. Between June 9 and June 24, those 9 submarines sank 28 Japanese ships totaling nearly 55,000 tons. If American submarines could penetrate the most heavily defended waters with technology that could navigate through minefields, then nowhere was safe. The wreck of I-52 was finally discovered in 1995 by Paul Tidwell, an American undersea explorer, using side-scan sonar. The submarine sits upright on the ocean floor at 17,000 feet depth, its hull broken but largely intact. The gold, the tin, the tungsten, all the materials that Germany and Japan desperately needed, still rest in the cargo holds. Several expedition teams have visited the wreck, documenting the site and recovering some artifacts. But the human remains, the personal effects, the evidence of 111 lives ended in an instant, those remain undisturbed, a memorial on the deep ocean floor. The story of I-52 teaches us something fundamental about modern warfare. Technological superiority matters. Industrial capacity matters. Information superiority matters. Commander Kameo and his crew weren't cowards. They weren't incompetent. They were operating with inadequate technology against forces possessing decisive advantages. No amount of courage, skill, or determination could overcome that fundamental asymmetry. And here's the final irony. The nation that learned this lesson best was the one that lost. Post-war Japan transformed itself by understanding that technological excellence, quality control, and integrated systems determine success in modern competition. Former Japanese naval officers, including submarine veterans, took positions in companies like Sony, Toyota, and Honda, carrying with them lessons learned through bitter defeat. The economic miracle that made Japan a technological powerhouse by the 1970s and 1980s was built partly on understanding what American industrial and technological superiority had accomplished during the war. The ocean changed hands on the night of June 23, 1944, not through surface battles or dramatic confrontations, but through invisible technologies floating on waves, listening beneath them, transmitting data to forces that hunted with scientific precision. Sonobuoys, those simple battery-powered devices, represented a revolution in warfare, as significant as radar or the atomic bomb. They transformed undersea combat from art to science, from guesswork to certainty, from chance encounter to systematic elimination. Commander Uno Kameo and the thousands of Japanese submariners who died during the war were defeated by an industrial and technological system they couldn't comprehend until too late. The recordings of I-52's destruction, still preserved in the National Archives, stand as testament to that technological revolution. The sounds captured on those wire spools, the propellers, the explosion, the crushing hull, the escaping air, tell a story not just of one submarine's end, but of how technology transforms warfare and determines which nations rise and which fall. That transformation happened not through grand strategy or brilliant tactics, but through scientific innovation, industrial capacity, and technological systems deployed with devastating effectiveness. The lesson remains relevant today. In modern warfare, in global competition, in any field where nations or organizations compete, technological superiority backed by industrial capacity determines outcomes. That lesson, learned painfully by Japanese submariners between 1941 and 1945, echoes through history and remains vital for understanding our world today. The silent hunter, the sonobuoy, changed undersea warfare forever, and somewhere, 3 miles beneath the Atlantic Ocean, I-52 rests as eternal witness to that transformation.